This presumptive is a special presumptive list, 1-year period, because unlike most other presumptives, they require wartime. You had to have been in theater, okay? Vietnam, Korea, Gulf War, right? This does not. You could have been stationed in Hawaii the whole time and nobody cares, right? This is just simply you wrote the blank check, you got all the shots and vaccines and everything else that they wanted to give you. There's some things that are going to happen to you. Believe me, this is why this stuff is here. These weird diseases, right, are because you're a petri dish. So without going down that rabbit hole, I did want to bring up, in addition to that, because there's one other presumptive, well, there's 4 other presumptive conditions, Clay, and I know you know them, that don't require war experience, right? There's no theater, there's no combat requirement as far as being, in an actual theater of combat, right? So those are Hansen's disease, tuberculosis, multiple sclerosis, and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, right? These, and this is really interesting, right? And this is also one of those weird eye openers for people. So you're telling me that because I served in the military, regardless of where and when, and what my experience was, stationed in Hawaii the whole time, if I come down with Hansen's disease within 3 years, the VA is going to honor that and give me service connection. You got to think about this in the sense of the VA is conceding to whatever you may have experienced in your military, regardless of where you went. You have a greater chance than the civilian sector of developing Hansen's disease, is essentially what they're saying, just because of your time in the military. Tuberculosis, 3 years, if it shows up within 3 years. MS, if it shows up within 7 years of discharge. And this last one, Clay, is really important for folks. If you know anybody in your family that served in the military who has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, it's an indefinite time frame. They could get ALS at any age, any duration of time after their service, and be service connected at 100% from the VA. That's a huge deal, and anybody who has ALS that served in the military needs to know that this is an option for them. So Clay, real quick, any thoughts on these 4? I mean, I kind of gave the information, but I'd love to get your quick thoughts on it. I mean, there's not much else to say, but I would love your thoughts, and then we can transition.
Yeah, I'll kind of expand it, right? I'll tell you this: if I develop cancer, I don't even have to look at a list, and I will submit the claim, right? And it kind of goes back to what you said, that just based on those 4, the VA has enough data, right? They don't just kind of make this up. There's data that support the presumptives. That's what gets passed. There's enough data to say that military members, no matter where, are prone to develop these 4 conditions more so than anyone else. Now that those cancers, I'll just kind of lump them in one ball, right? Diseases and cancers. That's just 4. The more deployments you do, the more presumptives that grow. And so if you have deployments and basically what I'm trying to say is if I have cancer, I don't even care if it's on a list. I don't even have to do research. I'm going to submit the claim just based on that statement, right? And that's really what I want to push is if you're a veteran with cancer, do you have to know the ins and outs of the law that made that pass and the data that went into that made that pass? Absolutely not. If you have cancer, I would absolutely submit the claim. Let the VA do VA stuff. You don't have to tell them you were in Vietnam or you were in Korea. They're going to know, right? We have personnel records and DD-214s that show that. And I would just submit the claim, to be honest, just to make it Barney style easy. If you have cancer, especially ALS, right? Anything that's like very, very severe, submit the claim, right? There's really no harm to it whatsoever. And I'll kind of just blanket it at that. And that list does expand as we go further into this.
Right. Yeah. And I'll throw in one last kind of thought there. Even if your cancer is not on a presumptive list and you file for it, you may get denied, which it's not fine, but this is the world we're in. But two things happen. One, it gives the VA an additional thing to look at. Oh, this person filed for that cancer. Well, you're not probably the only one. So if 1,000 people do that, or 10,000, or 100,000 people file for that cancer from the same location, all of a sudden the wheels start to turn and they go, hey, there's been a spike in this cancer for people in this area. Maybe we should make that a presumptive condition. Let's look into it, study it, whatever. So there's that piece. The other piece is that if they deny you, now you're going to take a step back, go work on your Nexus letter. Hey, look, doc, I was exposed to this, that, is that, and you just got to kind of work the standard claim process and try to prove the Nexus in that way, which isn't the end of the world. I mean, you might be able to find something else. For example, a quick one, a buddy of mine, older gentleman, served during the Vietnam War, but not in Vietnam, right? So he was up in Alaska somewhere on a ship. So he was on the ship, and I don't remember how long he did. Not super long. He was in 4 or 5 years or whatever it was. Got out, and then when he's in his 70s, he develops lung cancer. Okay, there's no presumptives for him. He served in Alaska on a ship, right? And he didn't get this condition until 50 years later or whatever it is. So so he filed and got denied, right? Of course. So then we do research and we find, ship registries and all this stuff and different, blah, blah, blahs and all this stuff, and tracked where he was at. And sure enough, found his ship and that it was just riddled with asbestos, like everything back then. But that's evidence, right? So he's sitting there, scratching the walls, bored, breathing in the asbestos. Then the ship was worked on in a shipyard that was also like practically condemned because it was just so riddled with asbestos. So that was evidence in his favor, and then he was able to win the claim and so on and so forth. So that's what happens if you file and it doesn't get approved via presumptive. Those two things. VA gets some more information. Maybe it'll turn into a presumptive for other folks. You're paving the way, being that kind of pathfinder for folks. And then the second side is that you're not out. You just need to give a little more evidence. So what do you have, Clay?
Absolutely. So the Navy deals with asbestos more than anyone, just from my experience of talking with veterans. And we'll have this link down below as well. But it's exactly what you said, and I wanted to read it straight from the VA. And it talks about what documents you need to submit that claim to prove your asbestos caused that condition. And then the VA also says, hey, if you worked in these areas, you should probably go get checked. So the VA is
Right.
telling you what to do. And so I
Right.
just wanted to go over that as, really, really quickly. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt there, but
No, it's good.
there's 3 things. It says medical records that state your health condition. So you need a current diagnosis, right? Service records that list your job or specialty. It could be also location, right? I was on this ship. And then the last thing is the nexus, a doctor's statement that there's a connection between your contact with asbestos and that health condition. And so it's the VA telling you, hey, you need the big 3. You're like, got it. That we know. We can do that. Okay. And then it says, I'll just read the question. How do I know if I have a health condition caused by my contact with asbestos? And the VA says, get tested if you've worked in these areas, which are mining, milling, shipyards, construction, carpentry, and demolition. So tons of Navy work in the shipyard, obviously, right?
Right.
You have engineers in construction. You have
CBs.
a lot, yes. CBs, you have civil affairs, right? They're often engineers. You have infantry bubbas and bubbettes working with demolition, right? I mean, everything's under the sun here. And then it also says, the VA says, get tested if you've made or worked with products like flooring, roofing, cement, pipes, insulation, and then brake linings. And so if you fall in that category, the VA says, hey, get tested, get the evidence, and we'll go ahead and submit that claim for asbestos. And that's just one example of the exposure, right? Which technically isn't presumptive. And so, real quick, and then I'll kick it back to you. I don't want to go too deep into this because it's extremely confusing, but something called TERA, TERA, which is toxic exposure risk activity. TERA is not presumptive, although people think it is, but it's not, because TERA requires an opinion, like asbestos, right? Asbestos says a doctor's statement that there's a connection between your contact with asbestos and your health condition. So it requires an opinion. So technically it's not presumptive, but the VA is saying, hey, your exposure could be the in-service event for
Right.
that condition.
Right.
That's
You bring
basically
up
TERA. Go ahead.
you bring up a great point, Clay, because that what you're talking about for folks to really grasp this is if you understand how good presumptives are and how difficult it can be to do just a standard claim sometimes, just trying to figure it out. This is that sweet spot in the middle that it's like they're giving me all the tools I need to create the nexus, right? And I think that this is almost, it's a hybrid. It's almost a presumptive, right? So that is I'm glad that you brought it up in that way, because it is a very, very important piece. And it's that almost presumptive. You still need to prove it and get the doctor's opinion and all that stuff, but it's much easier than saying, my GERD started when I was in and I have no documentation. Okay, well, now that's a pretty uphill battle. So these types of things with the exposure risks are outstanding. So it's good that they acknowledge it and utilize it. It's kind of like, and tinnitus most likely, we did a video on it, will most likely go away, but then there'll still be that if there's hearing loss and tinnitus, then, whatever. But the whole MOS noise exposure list contributing to hearing loss and tinnitus, it doesn't make it a presumptive, but it makes it a lot easier to get the yes, because there's already some acknowledgments that it would be highly likely if you had certain MOSs.